Hi guys, I'm Charlie, a Charlie Book Fanatic. Welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to tell you 5 reasons why you should read historical fiction. Obviously all of these reasons are subjective and they are things I have experienced while reading historical fiction, and if things are different for you that is completely fine, but these are just my reasons. And I hope I can convince you to pick up a historical fiction book because of my reasons. The first reason I have here is that historical fiction transports you to an entirely different world. And that is maybe a little contradictory because historical fiction takes place in our own world, just years in the past. But that is exactly the point I'm trying to make here, because we have never experienced any of these years in the past. I'm obviously talking about historical fiction set in like medieval times or something like that, World War II. Most of us haven't experienced anything related to those events, and I think it is very interesting to transport ourselves to those worlds that we only know from history books. This is my second reason, which is that historical fiction can be so educational. Even more so than non-fiction history books. They actually detail experiences that people could have lived through. And history books are mostly very dry, and I feel like historical fiction books really make history come to life. They tell you the story as if you're actually there. You can learn so much about a period like World War II based on those books, because the authors did a hell of a lot of research with books and the internet and articles, and they made their own story based on that research. And I feel like it really makes history come to life, and it makes it a lot more accessible for people who maybe don't want to pick up a boring, dry history book. My third reason is that history books give different perspectives, different values. Obviously nowadays we all have our own values, and some values are more important than others, but in the past those values were different. Values were prioritized differently. And I think it is very interesting to read about, because things that people valued in the past might be things that we don't value at all right now. Like in the past, family life was a very important value, and nowadays not everyone has a family, and it is not really frowned upon anymore. And in the past, when you weren't married, you weren't really anything. You were seen as some kind of wretched being if you were a woman. And nowadays it's just normal for a woman to not be married and just live her life. And if she doesn't have kids, that's completely fine. In the day, that was such a taboo. And I think it is very interesting to read about those dynamics, because nowadays, everything is so different. My fourth reason is that it is kind of like fantasy. Some situations you can only imagine. And this relates back to reason number 1, where you haven't really experienced any of this. So some things, like World War II, most of us haven't really experienced this because we're just too young. We weren't alive back in the day. And most of us in the Western world can't really imagine what a world war like that would have looked like. Which almost makes it like fantasy, although it is based on obviously real world events, but for us it can feel like fantasy. And I think for some people it could be useful to look at it like that, because it is kind of a fantastical situation, an imaginary situation to yourself that you can lose yourself in, just like with a fantasy book with its own world and its own world events. Although it has really happened, but just for an entirely different generation. And my last reason is that past situations can also be very relatable. It doesn't have to be an abstract thing. Feelings and emotions don't change through time, which is maybe the one thing that never changes. Although the world keeps changing and technology keeps developing, feelings and emotions always stay the same. People were always in love. People always felt sad or angry. These things were always the same. And I think that makes historical fiction relatable as well. Even though you haven't lived through any of these situations, you can still relate to these people because they're feeling the same things you have felt before. So these are 5 reasons why you should read historical fiction. I hope they managed to convince you somehow. Do you like to read historical fiction, or don't you like to read historical fiction? Tell me why in the comments down below. I would love to know. Thank you for watching.